In ActionScript 2, a behavior gets attached directly to a target. And by target, I usually mean a trigger device. In this case, it's going to be our buttons. So let me go down and click on the Portfolio button, and we'll set that one up first. When our user clicks the Portfolio button, we want to take the playhead and move it from wherever it's currently sitting over to the Portfolio section. Now, I can see by clicking in my timeline that that's going to be right here at frame 100. So let's set up a behavior for it. I'll go back and reselect the Portfolio button, and we'll go over to our Behaviors panel. To add a behavior, we'll click the plus button. But before you do, always check to make sure you're attaching the behavior to the right thing, the Portfolio button in this case. Now I'll just click the plus button, and the behavior we're going to be used is found down under the movie clip settings. But you see we've got quite a few behaviors here we can work with. We're looking for one called Go To and Play at Frame or Label. The Go To part is saying that the timeline is going to go to a certain point. So we'll just click that. Now as you can see, we just get a dialog box with selections to make. The top part of the selection is which timeline we're working on. The root is the way ActionScript refers to the main scene 1 timeline. And that's where we want to move the playhead. So we're going to leave the setting at root. The bottom is asking us which frame we should move the playhead to, and that should be 100. Let's click OK, and we're actually done. Now, if you'd like to check on the actions that it wrote, you can just flip right over to the Actions panel. The Actions panel also shows us that we're selecting the Portfolio button, and it shows us that this script has been written for it. So we didn't have to do any writing at all. Now, let's go try out our new behavior. I'm just going to test our movie. Remember, we had a stop action at the home page, so it should be stopped right here at home. I can roll over my buttons, and if I click on Portfolio, here comes my Portfolio section. Now, remember we had a stop in the Portfolio section, but our movie clip's going to continue playing. So our portfolio should loop and loop here until we move the playhead someplace else. And let's make one little change before we set up our other buttons. You'll notice that we had to specify a specific frame in our timeline in order to move our playhead around, and we set it to 100. But if we started adding some elements or editing our animation, we may want to insert some frames into this section and spread things out a bit. That's going to move all of our sections around in the timeline. Now, whenever you're doing this type of movement using a go-to, it's a better idea to go to a labeled frame instead of a number frame. We can add a label to any frame in the movie simply by putting a keyframe there. So let's modify our behavior just a little bit. First, I'm going to go to my Portfolio section at frame 100, and I'm going to add a keyframe right at that point. I'll press F6. Now, at that keyframe, over in our Properties window, we can add a label to it right here. And I'm just simply going to name it Portfolio. Now, as soon as that name is entered, a little flag appears up on the top of my panel. And if we just move things out of the way, I'm just going to move this stop action down a few frames. It doesn't really matter where it is, as long as it's in the Portfolio section. There, we can see the label that we added to our keyframe. Now, since we're going to be using buttons to move around to the other sections of our movie, I'm going to go ahead and add labels now so that we can set up our behaviors. Let me go down a little bit. That's our exhibition section. So I'm going to add a keyframe, F6. And at that keyframe, I'm going to name that Exhibitions in the label name field. I'll scroll down just a little bit to find our contact section. We'll add a keyframe right there. And you see how I'm reusing the AS main layer for this. That kind of keeps all my script types of things together. Now, in that new keyframe, I've got another label name. We'll call that Contact. And if I go back to my Home section, we also want to label that. We've got a button for it as well. Now, for Home, I'm going to set it right at the beginning here. You'll notice in the timeline, that's the point where my photo starts fading in. So we're going to make that our Home section. And I'll just label that frame by adding a keyframe, F6. We'll click into the label name field and we'll type home. And there I can see my label appear right there at the top. Now let's go back to our portfolio button behavior and let's fix that up. I can just click right here on my portfolio button. If I go over to my behavior panel, I can see the behavior that we set up earlier, and I can just double click on it to reopen that dialog. Down at the bottom, we typed 100 before, but if we want to use the frame label, I'm going to use whatever I typed into that label name, which is portfolio. I'll click OK, and we've modified our behavior. Now let me click to close that behavior panel, and let's set up our other buttons as well. We simply need to do the same thing for each one. So let's get home first. I'll click on the home button. We'll go over to behaviors. I'll click on plus, and down under movie clip, we'll choose go to and play at frame or label. Now notice for the home button, I want to go to the label and then play the timeline so that our photo fades in. I'll leave the timeline at root, and I'll simply type in the home label here. We'll click OK, and we've got our behavior set up for our home button. Now let's set up the other two. Exhibitions, I'll click on the button, we'll go over to behaviors, I'll click the plus button, and under movie clip, this time I'm going to pick a different one. Now we don't have a stop action inside of our exhibition section, and that's basically because it's static right now. Now if we added some animation, we may want to use a go to and play, but we would have to add a stop action to make sure it didn't go on by itself to the contact section. Well, just to make things easy, I'm going to use a go to and stop. It's going to do the same thing. It's going to move the playhead, but instead of continuing to play at that point, it's just going to stop and hold at that frame. So we'll click go to and stop at frame or label. We'll leave the timeline set to root, and we'll change the frame to the exhibition labeled frame. I'll click OK. And we've got our exhibitions button set up. Let's do our contact button, and we've got all four. I'll click on the contact button and we'll do the same thing. I'll click on plus in the behaviors panel. Under movie clip, I'm going to choose go to and stop at frame or label, just like we did for exhibitions. And I'll change the label that we're going to go to contact. Now we've got four behaviors set up. Let's try out our movie and see how they work. I'll test my movie. All of our buttons and our home page comes up really nicely. Let's try portfolio. That goes to the portfolio section. Exhibitions goes right to our exhibitions area and stops. Contact does the same thing. And home takes us right back to our home page. So we actually have a functioning site now. Let's close our test window. Now I've actually got one more behavior I'd like to try that you might use in a typical Flash application. We had an email button, or at least an email piece of text, down in our contact section. So let me just scroll our timeline down a little bit. I think I'm going to have to move over here, and we'll get to contact. There we go. We added this piece of text earlier. Let's make it into a button, and let's set it up so that you can actually send an email from here. First of all, I'm going to press F8 while I have it selected. That'll bring up my Convert to Symbol dialog box, and we'll just call this Email Button. I'm going to make sure the type is set to button, and we'll click OK. And let's edit this real quick. As a minimum, I like to at least put an over state on a button. So I'm just going to click on Over here, press F6. And as a rollover for our button, we're going to keep it really simple. I'm just going to change the color to a yellow. So when you roll over this button, it'll at least turn yellow so we know to click it. Now let's go back to scene 1 and let's add a behavior to it. I've already got it selected. I'll go over to my behaviors menu. We'll click the plus button. And this time I'm going to go down to the web section, and we've got a behavior called Go to Web Page. Now, this is pretty neat. You can actually set it up to go to any web page you want. So, in a normal application, you can set up a button to go outside of your Flash movie and open up a web page or go to any other area on the web. You can even open up a blank page. What we're going to use this for is email. And all I need to do in the URL field is type in mail to, that's all one word, colon, and then whatever your email address is. I'll just type in me@here. I'll click OK, and now whenever my users click that button, they're going to be able to send an email. Let's see how that works. I'll test my movie. We'll go out to our contact page. First of all, I can see that my button works if I roll over it. And then if I click it, you can see that it pulls up your email client and puts the address that you had in your field right in there. So we can even go outside of our Flash movie using behaviors. I'll close up my test window.